Hello, all viewers. I am sitting here with Paul Levy, who wrote the book Dispelling Wetiko. Is that right? Breaking the Curse of Evil, and it's somewhat based off of, largely based off of an idea that Jack D. Forbes wrote about. He's a Powhatan Lenape, Delaware Lenape, tribal member. He recently passed away in 2011. He has a book called Columbus and
Columbus and Other Cannibals.
Right, Columbus and Other Cannibals, and which I began reading not too long ago, and that's published on Seven Stories Press, same publishing company that puts out a lot of Derek Jensen's work. And I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, Paul, but I've read about the concept on the Reality Sandwich blog, on some of your articles there, and I've found a whole lot of kind of accurate. Philosophically, I found it to be very accurate as far as all the sort of mechanisms or levers, as Derek Jensen likes to say, of civilization, and it's referred to as the disease of exploitation. And so, could you kind of just talk a little bit about that and,
Sure.
What kind of influenced you to start writing about this?
Yeah, sure. So what I've done, I've actually translated this indigenous term, the Wetiko virus, you could say, which is a Native American term, into a modern psychological idiom. And so I point out that the origin of the disease, it's an actual psychospiritual disease of the soul, whose origin is the human psyche. And it will, in a sense, act itself out through our blind spot, through our unconscious, in a way where we become compelled to act it out while simultaneously it hides itself from being seen. And so it's a form of, so it operates through the psyche, its sources in the psyche, and its cure is also through the psyche, through bringing consciousness to it, because it operates through unawareness. And you could say it's a form of like this blindness, of a psychological form of blindness, where the people infected with it, and we all potentially have it. You see, it pervades the collective unconscious of all of our species, which is to say that any of us could, at any moment, fall prey to it. And one way to envision that is, who among us has not fallen asleep and fallen into their unconscious at any given moment and acted out their unconscious in a way that's hurtful either to themselves or to other people. And so from that point of view, it makes no sense to say, oh, they have Wetiko and we don't. And if we actually hold that point of view of concretizing somebody else as having Wetiko, then that polarization is an expression that we ourselves are under the spell of the bug. And so it works with the projective tendencies of the mind in such a way that we become, in a sense, under a self-created spell. And instead of like having the awareness of our interconnectedness with each other and our interdependence with nature and with each other, we actually see others in the environment as objects separate from us, through which we can exploit and take from them without giving anything back. Like, so there's no sense of the oneness or the, like I was saying, the interconnectedness of all of life. And so that's really a very simple description of what Wetiko is. And it's actually informing not only on the individual dimension, all of our addictions and self-destructive behavior, but it also, on a more global, collective dimension, it's informing what's playing out in the greater body politic, like all of the evil that's playing out in the world. So it's actually at the root of all of the evil, not just personal evil, but archetypal evil, and not just individual evil, but more also collective. But it's really like the deeper archetypal transpersonal dimension of evil that inspires us to treat each other in this inhumane way. You could say the Wetiko bug, it's like a virus of the mind, and that's really at the bottom of it. And but the thing I point out in my book is that encoded in this virus is some form of like this blessing, in that it's showing us, in a sense, more accurately who we are. It's showing us what I call the dreamlike nature of reality, and it's actually helping us to actually realize the dreamlike nature of reality and wake up. So it's really paradoxical that here's like the deepest evil that's actually, in the process of taking down our species, in which we're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet, and we're killing ourselves. And simultaneously encoded in the disease is this blessing that can potentially help us to wake up. And it's a quantum phenomenon. By that I mean, just like is light a wave or a particle? Well, it depends how you observe it. Similar with Wetiko. Is Wetiko going to be destroying us? Is Wetiko going to be helping us to wake up and helping us to evolve? Well, it depends how we dream it.
Yeah.
So that's really the point.
Mm-hmm. And it has its origins in First Nations myth. I'm gathering. I don't know too much about its origins. Could you explain a little bit more?
Yeah,
about
well,
that?
sure. Well, they have in their mythology, they'll have like this Wetiko. It's sort of like a supernatural monster, and it came out of the imagination of the indigenous people, and where somebody, because of their own excess, can literally become possessed by this entity, and with this entity, whenever it will eat something, it just grows bigger, but it never gets filled. So it's pointing at, it's expressing that it's insatiable.
Yeah.
And so in their like sort of the mythology, what I am doing with my book is pointing out that that's expressive of the psychological dynamic that's happening in our culture. I mean, think about our culture, the consumer culture, where they're just continually fanning the flames of we need to buy more and consume more and never be happy, never be satisfied. And that's, you see, the thing about the Wetiko bug is that it's this what's called this daimonic energy, and the daimonic energy is an archetypal transpersonal energy that can literally take over a person or a group of people, and in such a way that they literally become, once they become taken over, they just become the instrument for the incarnation of that, for the this higher dimensional, this daimonic energy. And so it's like we then become, in a way, just the conduits or the channels or the instruments for this higher dimensional transpersonal energy, like we're puppets on a string. And that's the way the Wetiko bug works. Like, some people actually can become so fully taken over at any given moment that they're, in a way, just a portal for this higher dimensional disease to come through. And what I point out in the book is that then the field, the non-local field of consciousness itself, actually will configure itself to, in a sense, conspire to support the illness, in the sense that, see, one of the things about Wetiko, it's actually, because of its non-locality, which is a physics term, which means it's not bound by the conventional laws of space and time, it actually, will operate through the field. So it makes no sense when you study somebody who is exhibiting the behavior of Wetiko at any given moment, it makes no sense at all just to study them as an individual person, because they don't exist as an individual person in separation from the field. And it's all like a big inner, kind of active, inner, sort of like a related system. And you need to study it holistically, and then you begin to realize, oh wow, this Wetiko bug is getting actually dreamed up by the field as an expression of something in ourselves. So when we see somebody out there who's seemingly taken over by, the Wetiko bug, whoever, whether it's some politician or whether it's the economic system or, the global body politic or a particular corporation like Monsanto or a nation state like the United States, whatever, to understand that whatever you're seeing, the evil you're seeing out there is actually reflecting something inside of us. And that, what I just described, that's very much like a dream, because a dream, the inner situation of the psyche is actually getting expressed through the outer forms of the dream.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean when you begin to realize that, you begin to realize that Wetiko, through its manifestations of its, seeming evil parts, is actually revealing something to us. It's potentially showing us the dreamlike nature, and that's, that's extraordinary. That's like that. It can potentially help us to wake up and to evolve into a higher state of coherence with ourselves and with each other.
Yeah, it certainly. And to me, when you describe it, what comes to mind is, a lot of conspiracy theorists like to use the Illuminati and the pyramid and the 1% and the 99%, and it's almost like everybody sort of has this sort of inner version of that, as reflections of the civilization in which we're a part of, like an inner tyrant, sort of, and it's a matter of keeping that in check. Is what it sounds like. Is that kind of accurate?
Well, it sounds, but it's not just keeping it in check. Like there's this negative thing inside of us that we have to keep, like in check, like locked up or something like that. It's that inner tyrant that's actually our power that we're not like congruent with. So it actually contains our power. And so, the idea being that, you see, say for example, when you see, the Wetiko bug, whether it's operating through a person or through a family system or through the non-local field or however it operates, you actually, when you discover that, oh wow, it only can act itself out in the way it does because we're unconscious of it. That it feeds off of our unconsciousness, it feeds off of our fear, off of polarization, off of when we react to it. And the point is, because remember I was saying it's like this form of like, sort of this psychic sort of like, blindness. And so when you add consciousness to it, just like if you have like, this vampire, the vampire, when the sun comes up, the vampire doesn't have any power in the light of day, and that's, symbolic of Wetiko. And actually the whole like vampire myth is, like you could say, and I point this out in the book, is really, whether it's, the people did it consciously or not, it's a perfect expression of the Wetiko bug and how it operates. And because the thing about vampires, it's very, when you get bit by one, you become one. And in a sense, when you get infected with Wetiko, it's a contagious psychic disease. And if you don't actually have the strength to add the consciousness to it, to dispel it, then you actually become its unwitting agent, like you become a secret agent, even to your secret being secret even to yourself. And so the point being that when you add awareness to how Wetiko operates, like I was saying, through a person, through a group of people, through the field, through a family system or a nation or the planetary body politic, you actually take away its power to act itself out through you, because when we're unconscious, we're unwittingly, we have a complicity with this bug, with the evil that's playing out. And not only do you take away its power, but you empower yourself as a creator, as a creative being. And then, particularly when you connect with other people who are also getting turned on to, what I'm calling Wetiko, but every spiritual tradition has different names for, the same dynamic. Actually, that's what makes a spiritual tradition like a wisdom tradition, is if they're like shedding light on what I'm calling Wetiko. And the point is, particularly when you connect with other people who are also getting turned on to it, you discover that you can, connect with each other and get in phase with each other or get in sync with each other in a way where you can really, help to dispel the sort of this, the malevolent energy in the field, and simultaneously even more deepen your own awakening. And so that's what's available to us. That's what's actually playing out. When you see, one of the things I go into in the book is when you contemplate this as a dreaming process, you discover, what I mean is just like a dream. A dream is speaking in symbols. It's like a reflection of something in us. And so when you contemplate what's happening in the world as if it's a dream, something is actually is being shown to us. And that's the point of view, that I've written the book, through. And and it's, it's a very, this isn't like a practice run. We're in the process of destroying ourselves. But what I point out in the book is that process is inspired by Wetiko. It's very much like in trauma. When you're in trauma, what makes trauma, trauma is we have a compulsion to repeat and recreate the trauma. So the way we're trying to heal from the trauma is the very thing that actually is creating the very problem we're trying to heal from, in an infinitely self-perpetuating feedback loop. But encoded in our acting out the trauma is potentially, it can help us to actually unlock something that's being shown to us. And then when we see that, we actually snap out of that vicious cycle and up-level and heal. And the same thing is true. We're actually a species in trauma, in collective trauma, and individual trauma, and we're actually the trauma, which is another way of describing Wetiko, when I talk about that in the book. The trauma is actually inspiring us to destroy the biosphere, each other, and ourselves. And I point out, I go, wow, well, we're actually destroying ourselves as the way to learn how to not destroy ourselves, which we clearly haven't learned, or we wouldn't be destroying ourselves. And implicit in that logic is that there's something being shown to us. And if we recognize what's being shown to us, that's when we can expand our consciousness and wake up. And that's the solution. That's what this is all about. But if we don't recognize what's being shown to us, we're just going to continue to destroy ourselves. And at a certain point, you cross, the threshold where there's a point of no return. So it's a really dangerous situation. But sometimes the unconscious, when you think about this being a dream, sometimes the unconscious, it creates a literal, incredibly edgy situation where we're forced right to our edge, because that's maybe what we need to wake up. And I'm pointing out that when you view this like a dream, that's actually what's happening. And so it's really, really important for more and more of us to actually have that recognition of what's being shown to us, to connect with each other, to what I call conspire, to co-inspire each other, where we activate the collective, like we have this, genius that gets collectively activated when we get in phase with each other. And that's when we can evolve. We can help each other to evolve and to really stabilize our lucidity and just absolutely dispel the Wetiko virus that's inspiring all of the evil. But if we don't recognize that, we're just then we're doomed. Yeah, really.
So there's you mentioned trauma and suffering, and so there's a certain sense of awareness that one would have to have of their own sort of inner traumas and suffering, and how they're kind of operating out of that then?
Yeah, no, totally. In the sense that we're all, in a sense, in trauma. Our species is in trauma. We all have wounds. I mean, that's part of being like this living being is, in this dimension, is that we get wounded, and it all depends on what do we do with that wound. Do we just split off from it and try to circumnavigate, go around it, to avoid it? Or do we actually go through it? And this brings to mind the archetype of the healer who's wounded, the wounded healer who's related to the shaman. And the shaman is the primordial healer who, and typically the shamanic archetype gets activated because of an emotional disturbance, because there's a sickness, or they're having problems, or there's some sort of their equilibrium is somehow disturbed, which necessitates a descent into the depths of the unconscious, into the underworld, the place of madness, of demons, of death, and all those things. But because the shaman or the wounded healer or the artist, or there are a lot of different these terms for it, is able to go through that realm of shadow and get in touch with their own darkness and their own shadow and their own woundedness, their own trauma, their own sickness, and not get caught in that, but come out the other side, and they literally become transformed in the process. This is an archetypal dynamic, and that us, a lot of us as individuals are actually going through, and it's really helpful to recontextualize and understand, it's actually, not just a personal process I'm going through, but, a lot of us are going through this. We're all in this soup together. We've all been wounded or having trauma and being forced to come to terms with our own shadow. And when you do that, as compared to just being in avoidance of it and, let me drink or get high or, whatever substance I'll use or behavior to get away from the pain, when you actually are able to just experience, because it is kind of painful, it involves some sort of suffering of the ego, some sort of passion, but if you're able to go through that while keeping your heart open and keeping your awareness, you're actually in a way creating some sort of energy body, or it's like you're going to the gym to go to lift these weights, but they're psychic weights. And so one way of understanding the Wetiko virus, it's like this psychic, like this weight machine that forces us to build the muscle of enlightenment, of who we are. And one way even more deeply understanding this, like the Buddha himself, and the word Buddha, it literally means, he who has actually had the recognition of the dreamlike nature and has woken up to the dreamlike nature of reality and of himself. And right before the Buddha attained enlightenment, he was sitting in meditation under, the tree, the Bodhi tree, and he's being confronted by the forces of the evil one, which you could think of as that's Wetiko. Here is like, these dark forces who are just tormenting him and seemingly obstructing his enlightenment. And yet, when you really contemplate it from the deeper point of view, those seemingly darker forces of Wetiko were actually his secret allies, because they were the ones who helped him to cultivate, the deeper sort of the muscle of realization that he wouldn't have been able to catalyze and to catapult himself out of his sort of egoic identity without their challenge, and so they actually were in disguise as helpers. The same thing with Wetiko, that it's like a virus of the mind, but instead of with a typical, when you give antibiotics to if we have a virus, the virus might mutate or whatever. The Wetiko virus forces us to mutate. It forces us to evolve. And so that's really the question, is are we going to have enough awareness to do that? And but it really, your question is a good one, because it involves coming to terms with our trauma and with our abuse and with our suffering and with our wounds, and not getting caught in that, and not getting caught in the story, or not identifying with them, but going through, and just like the shaman, they descend into the underworld, and then when they come out the other side and they come back to the community, they typically have these gifts that, because of their ordeal, they then can offer to the tribe, to the community, and the community is the world right now. And the point is that all of us are these shamans in training, and to the extent that any of us are able to go through that experience and come out the other side, we all have these incredible creative gifts for each other, and that's really what's being called for, and so needed, and really super essential and important at this day and age.
Yeah, and I definitely see that there is a fairly significant amount of kind of cultural shifts, transformation taking place, as far as I've been studying this quite a bit as far as how that all kind of ties in with technology and communication, and I had listened to a little bit of an interview that you did with an Irish guy on YouTube about 2012. I'm not like I've listened and read and Terence McKenna quite often, and that's where I first came across the the myths about 2012, and so I'd been pretty fascinated in what was leading up to that, and the kind of I guess the level of availability of information, for example, the way technology has shaped culture to that point, and how people are kind of using that to communicate all these ideas that are creating this kind of cultural shift. It's nowhere near as much as it needs to be necessarily, not yet, but I think that it's going on though, and there's a lot of people who, for example, are practicing principles that tie into non-aggression and non-force, non-coercion, which I think are definitely related as far as not operating out of one's own suffering and trauma, and making it part of your kind of daily routine and your daily practice to kind of treat other people in a way where you're basically not inflicting your trauma and your suffering on them, and instead learning ways of communicating and ways of interacting, and practicing the ways of interacting that create less of that, which I kind of see as being something that when people throw around this idea of peace, something that is very much a part of that, like in the real world. There's this abstract idea of peace, and then there's this there's actually putting it into practice, and what does that look like? And I think that that's definitely that's one of the ways in which it presents itself. And as far as activism goes, there's been just this last week, I don't know if you've been following the anti-fracking protests in New Brunswick, and the Mi'kmaq tribe, I hope I'm saying it correctly. If I'm not, I apologize, have been doing all sorts of actions to, prevent fracking, the fracking industry from exploiting their land and exploiting their people and their culture. And they've been doing all kinds of different actions in the streets, and it just seems to be getting kind of bigger, as far as actions like that go, because of the economic situation on a global scale. And one of my favorite movies is Nicoya Katsi, I believe is how you say it, Nicoya Katsi. It's a Godfrey Reggio film, and it's a Navajo word for life is war. And a lot of people kind of have this understanding that we're kind of all living in that sort of condition now, at a global level, because it's it's inherent. Like you said, it's embedded almost in our dream, kind of collective dream state, if you will. And people are looking for ways for an alternative, and they're doing it more and more. And there's lots of good things about that, and there's lots of ways in which they're successful, and they're, like I said, there's all these new kind of well, at least to a lot of people, it's these different, like, new ideas, new ways of thinking that they're coming across that kind of all tie into the same sort of idea as far as the Wetiko is concerned. And what are, I guess, what would your words of advice be to activists and to people who are practicing all these?
So I talk about in the book, I have a whole chapter on different, like, these tactics that Wetiko plays out, because it plays out in an infinity of ways. And it's a work in progress, and that I'm urging everybody to, to add to experiences they have with how Wetiko plays out in their family or friends or business or whatever. And part of that chapter I coin a term called spiritually informed political activism, in which I point out the importance of combining spiritual, being spiritual, just aware, but being politically active. Like that, either one, being a spiritual practitioner by itself is not enough these days. And I point out that people who just feel like, oh, I'm just going to sit in my room and meditate, and I'm going to become enlightened and become all in balance, and then the world is just going to reflect that. The exceptional 1 out of a billion person might be really being called to be sitting and meditating in a cave, doing their prayers. But I would point out that we're at the point in the dream, in the waking dream, that our inner process is manifesting as the outer world. And so that the way to work on your inner process is to be fully engaged in the outer world. And while simultaneously the way to heal the outer world is to be in touch with your inner process, so the two are reciprocally informing and influencing and feeding each other. So the idea of just somebody going, oh, I'm just going to sit in my room and do my prayers, and the world is just going to reflect that back and all that, that's true to a certain degree, but it's also a form of, like, this self-absorption. It's not recognizing, like I was just saying, that the inner process is manifesting as the outer world. And in the same way that people who are political activists, who just feel like, who are like, well-intentioned, with the best of intentions, but if they're reacting against the powers that be out of unconscious reactivity or anger or hatred, then they're feeding the Wetiko bug unwittingly. And so they're actually feeding the very thing they're reacting against. So what I'm pointing at is that, yeah, it's important to be politically active, integrated body politic, while having your consciousness informed by a deeper spiritual awareness of the deeper dreaming that's playing out that you're a part of. And when, those 2 points of view, the political, being a politically active person and a spiritually aware person, cross-pollinate each other, then synergistically, we become really empowered in a way that we can actually make a difference in the world.
And you've mentioned addiction, and which is another thing I've been, I've experienced it myself, and I think, in general, everyone has, because of, the mechanisms of the culture, the dominant culture in which we live, kind of thrives off of that in a really profound way, from what I've discovered. And you've written about the concept of the hungry ghosts in your book.
Yeah, no, totally, and that's very similar to, the thing about Wetiko, it's what inspires addiction, because when you think about addiction, we're trying to fill a void that can never be filled, and at a certain point it develops an autonomy and like an energy and a momentum that it just becomes like, in a sense, an autonomous complex, a self-reinforcing feedback loop that generates its own momentum endlessly, like it develops this life of its own. And that's related to the Buddhist idea of the hungry ghost, who have this, just craving, this hunger, and they have a big mouth and a thin throat and a big stomach, but it can never, they can never satiate themselves. So they're just always trying to fill that void, and that's very much, in a sense, a symbol of our, consumer society, and of like the whole way that our culture just, kind of reinforces and fans the flames of like the whole addictive process and behavior. And so it's important to understand that when I'm talking about in the book like Wetiko, it very much is like one way of really understanding and unlocking, the whole addictive process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And a lot of people, I often wonder, and a lot of people who I know often wonder, what it would be like if, if a lot more people just became less dependent on the system that's just, that's kind of perpetuating the destruction, and that kind of ties into a lot of these kind of transformational shifts I've been seeing, and transformational shifts I've been a part of. And so I guess as far as fracking goes, for example, or just in general, like at the community level, wherever anyone may be, whatever issue they may be focused on as far as the system is concerned, that you would basically recommend that the best way is to just stop being dependent on that system, then kind of learn to sort of break dependence on the system.
Well,
together.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing, it goes back to that, our complicity. We're all dreaming up the Wetiko epidemic. It's a psychic epidemic, it's a collective psychosis, and we're all dreaming it up together, and the outer world is just reflecting our own complicity in that. And then we become overly dependent on, the very system which is intrinsically sick, and so we become attached and interdependently so, and we're colluding with it. So yeah, to the point that we can really connect with our sovereignty and as creative beings and with our autonomy, while still understanding our interdependence, and then we could be investing our energy, whether it's our money or our attention, in self-sustaining ways, whether it's just investing in the local economy or investing in our own creative work, or investing in each other, instead of like when we're tied to this, insane culture we live in, and we then are, supporting the corporatocracy. In a sense, what we're doing is we're investing in our own suicide, in our genocide, and then we're actually part of the collective psychosis, where that's that part of us that's mad. Why would we be doing that? Well, because we've become infected by the Wetiko bug. And so, what I'm talking about is sort of a whole systems approach of seeing, the deeper interconnectedness of everything, including ourselves, and how we play a part in that, and how we can actually, in a sense, come clean and unplug from the pathological system, and as we heal and become whole, then we can be these real agents of change in the world.
I mentioned social and cultural alternatives, and a lot of people, I refer to it as a monopoly on violence. I learned that from reading about Derek Jensen, or excuse me, reading Derek Jensen's work, and that's. There's all these institutions that kind of mimic that monopoly, and looking at kind of alternatives to that monopoly on violence, wherever you may be. What kind of, I guess, what kind of alternatives can people create that you're aware of?
Yeah, well,
in their community, and
and I'm, that's something, because we're all these creative beings, we're all artists, and our canvas is this universe, we're all like creating the dream, this waking dream together, and there are ways of us being together in a way. Like one of the things I do, I have all these groups, I have these circles, all throughout the week in my house of friends and people who are in these communities, and we're together in a way where we're just really present with each other, with no agenda, no technique, except just to follow the moment together.
Mm-hmm.
And and they're like really helping people to heal, because it's a way of really being in authentic connection with each other. And people can share their process or what they're struggling with, but they don't even have to, because what we've discovered, it's like there's a way of being together where we can. It's almost like you just conjure up an alchemical container in such a way that people don't even have to share what their process is. Their process will get dreamed up and play out in the container. And that's the way we access, in a way, because we all have the intention to transduce light. And I'm just giving an answer from one specific thing that I've learned, that I've been doing for years, in a way that's helping people, bring people who are all plugging into that we're having a mass shared dream. And so we're all coming together in a way to inquire into how can we help each other to wake up even deeper, to dream ourselves awake. And when we have the intention to transduce light, we're actually invoking and inviting a guest, and the guest is the unconscious. And the guest then acts itself out through whatever members of the group. But instead of that being problematic, because it could potentially create separation and a misunderstanding and conflict and all those things, that becomes, in a way, the portal or the doorway to deepen our awareness and lucidity. And so it's an endlessly creative, alchemical, transformative process that we've plugged into just by being together in a certain way. And this is a whole other part of my work. I could go on to this, for like hours and days I could talk about this. But this is just an example of what's available to us as these incredible creative beings, that there's ways where we can hook up with each other and get in phase with each other and get in sync with each other and actually support each other, as creative dreamers, as creative artists, in a way where, because we're ultimately not separate, if I help you, it actually helps me. And so it cuts through that whole paradigm of, sort of self and other, And that's really, in a sense, what all of this is about. When I talk about, like, to begin to wake up to the dreamlike nature, what that means, what the dreamlike nature is that you realize, wow, we're actually dream characters in each other's dreams. You're a character in my dream, I'm a character in your dream. And just like when you have a dream at night and you contemplate all the different, characters in the dream, they're all just aspects of you, And when you see that, that understanding really cultivates a sense of real compassion. And the compassion is the Wetiko dissolver in a sense, like in the ultimate sense. And so, and with that, once you actually establish yourself in that compassionate point of view, and compassion isn't always like smiley faced, compassion can be fierce, and compassion can set boundaries, and compassion can say no. And, to things that are actually, not helpful or destructive or hurting people. And when you all of a sudden are cultivating a culture of compassion, that's actually, in a sense, feeding the healthy part of us. And because in a sense, when I talk about Wetiko, it's a collective psychosis. And in a sense, we are all in trauma. We've all become like sick in a way. We're like not operating in a fully optimal way. And so what I'm talking about is that, the very negativity or evil that's playing out in the world, encoded in that, it's actually a hidden form of blessing, but only if we have the recognition of what it's showing us. And, but it's really real, the danger, because if we don't recognize it, once again, I just always come back to this, we're going to be destroying our the whole biosphere, which is the life support system, and yet something is being offered us that's really, really profound, that is like an up-leveling, an evolutionary up-leveling of our entire species. And the thing about Wetiko, all mythologies and fairy tales, they talk about the importance of finding the name for like a demon. That when you find the name of a demon, you take away its power. And I talk about this in the last chapter of my book. And so, it doesn't make a difference what name, it has to be the right name, it just can't be any name, but in different wisdom traditions they'll have other names for Wetiko. And, like in the Hawaiian Kahuna tradition, they'll talk about the Ipa, or, in the Kabbalah they'll talk about something else, or in Buddhism they'll talk about something else, or in Christianity they'll talk about, it's a different name, but it's all pointing at the exact same thing. And that's that itself is an expression that this like energy that I'm calling Wetiko, it has like this miracle quality, because when something inspires a number, like innumerable names, that's pointing at that it has like infinite aspects, and it shapeshifts, and it's not just one particular thing. It's impossible to pin down and say it's this or that. It doesn't exist in a particular place. It's atemporal. It exists in a higher dimension. And all of those qualities inspire innumerable names. But when you find whatever name that actually expresses to you what it's pointing at, and you begin to see it, because remember, it's a psychic blindness. So it's a sense of opening our inner eyes, and you begin to see how it actually operates through the non-local field. You can't see the non-local field if you're identified with a separate self. You can't see the non-local field if you don't recognize this as a dream. All of what I'm pointing at is interconnected, and it all helps you not only see Wetiko, but to see who you are, who we are in a deeper way. And that's the real healing of the psychic epidemic. That's the real healing of the evil that's playing out. And it doesn't mean just sitting in your room, just like I was saying, just meditating. It means, no, we're active participants in the greater body politic. We're active participants in life, in the world. And we have to, in whatever creative way. Not everybody is going to write a book like I've done. Their form of activism might be doing something different. But we all have a particular gift, a particular talent, and it's super important to, in a way, snap out of our, just this numbness that we're in, this trauma, the disassociation, the tendency to just project the shadow outside of ourselves, and to really connect with what's going on with who we are, to come to terms with our own darkness. And there's a responsibility, because you realize, oh my God, we're complicit. We're all dreaming together what's playing out. And when you realize that, you discover we can dream a different dream. And this isn't just some sort of woo-woo, new agey fairy tale. One way to understand this, just like in a night dream, if you have lucidity in a night dream and you recognize you're dreaming, that's one thing. But then imagine if there's another person in that night dream who, one of your dream characters, and they also recognize that, you're having a dream, and you connect with that person. And then imagine 10 people, or imagine 100 people, and they all come together with that realization, oh my God, we're all dreaming. This dream universe we're in is just an expression of our own mind, of our own consciousness. That everything that's happening in this dream world we're inhabiting is actually expressing something that's happening inside of us. When you imagine that, I just imagine very easily, and I would suggest to everybody else that they could do their own imagination, that I would imagine that at a certain point, once a sufficient number of people in that dream recognize that they're dreaming and connect with each other, they realize, oh my God, we can put what I call our sacred power of the dreaming, the divine creative imagination, the part of us that's actually dreaming the dream into materialization, and we can dream it different. We can change the dream we're having, and that's evolutionary, and that's not just a night dream, that's actually what's available to us in the waking dream. That's what this is all about, and that's what my work is about, is trying to get that across to people. That's what's being shown to us, that's what's being available to us, it's fully available right now, and that's, I guess, how I would like to really, kind of come full circle in this talk, is just to sort of say, there's something that really is, being offered to us, and as artists and dreamers, it's really up to us to have that recognition of what's being shown, and to fully step into the dream and to dream it different. And that's not just some sort of, this raving of a psychotic person. This is like every wisdom tradition is talking about exactly that. And I, just as a Westerner, I've created, I've tried to translate it, the indigenous wisdom for all different traditions, to try to translate it into a modern, idiom that can be understandable by people in the modern day world.
Yeah, well, that's very much appreciated, and perhaps sometime later could do another talk on that, because I'm also very deeply fascinated by that stuff.
Yeah.
And but thank you very much for your time. And,
for sure, totally.
For talking about your book. Is there a website people could visit to?
Yeah. They can go to my website. AWAKEN in the dream. So awakeninthedream.com. And on that website, you can buy my book, autographed copies. I pay for shipping. And there's a ton of articles all about, just what we're talking about today. And there's a bunch of interviews too, and it's all for free. The only thing that costs money is if you want to buy the book or my first book. And I just want to get this information out because I feel it really, is helpful for people. And so please go to the website, awakeninthedream.com.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Totally.